Florida's prison system has been in the news for much of 2015, unfortunately for all the wrong reasons. Allegations of prisoner abuse, deplorable conditions, and failures to investigate wrongdoing have made headlines. In a special two-part series, we'll explore these issues and possible remedies. First with the leader of a think tank that conducts research on criminal justice issues, then with the Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. Next on Metro Center Outlook. The Florida State University Project on Accountable Justice is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to provide research-based reform to help guide Florida's criminal justice system. The group's director, Deborah Brodsky, is our guest today. Deborah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What is PAJ and what is its purpose?
The Project on Accountable Justice is a research and education institution. We're based at the Florida State University, but we're also formal partners with Baylor University, St. Petersburg College, and Tallahassee Community College. We were formed to look at the issues of crime and justice in Florida, essentially, but also across the country, using research and evidence to inform better policy decisions.
So you're not just looking at the state of Florida, then you're looking at institutions or reforms and suggestions that have accumulated around different areas in the country.
Absolutely. I mean, we're finding now this past year in particular has been explosive in terms of folks getting together and really rethinking what have been long-term issues in criminal justice policy. So we should be looking at other states.
Right, right. Do you think that Florida is experiencing more problems with criminal and juvenile justice than other states?
I think in some cases we are. I think all of the states have suffered for the same reasons. I think poor policy choices along the way have led to mass incarceration without much thought. This is an untested and certainly a massive experiment that we're just now sort of unraveling. But in Florida, we also have some incredibly promising opportunities. Crisis is a terrible thing to waste. The attention on the Department of Corrections in particular, the over-adultification of children in the juvenile and criminal justice system, and really lots of areas where we should be looking, like sentencing, are opportunities for us to change the path we're on.
And we'll talk about that in a little bit. You referred to prison reform getting more national attention. What do you think has brought this focus and attention? It's been building up for a while, but now it's making headlines.
It's really making headlines because it's really hard to ignore. The scale of mass incarceration in this country is as I said, it's
Is it the money?
It's definitely the money. It's $80 billion a year in corrections costs across the country. In Florida, that means $2.3 billion for our Department of Corrections. But more than that, it's the scale of how many people are affected. In Florida, it's 100,000 prisoners inside our Department of Corrections on any given day, 53,000 people in our jails, and really that scale of that community is something we don't imagine until it touches us, but it's touching all of us. The size of the population that we currently house in our Department of Corrections, either inside our prisons or in some form of community control, is larger than Alachua County. If you put everybody in Alachua County behind bars, that's what we're looking at. That's hard to ignore.
Yes, yes. Well, I was amazed to find that Florida has the third largest prison system in the United States. I had no idea. The PAJ has come out with a report, and you had 5 recommendations in there. Can you briefly outline what those recommendations are to give us an idea of what you're working on?
Absolutely. So fundamentally, we believe that more oversight, transparency and accountability of the system, not just the Department of Corrections, but really the criminal justice system at large, is essential and has been missing in our deliberations. Specifically for the Department of Corrections, that means maybe looking at some sort of oversight governance model. We're not really sure what it is. We looked at different areas, and certainly different states have different models. Florida has to find what works for it. But imagine a $2.3 billion corporation with no board of governors to oversee its its functioning. And more than that, the advocacy that it could bring to have more people involved in the discussions. Another thing that we thought was really important to look at was the stability of the agency secretary. We'd had 7 secretaries in 8 years at that time. This is November 2014. We now have a new secretary. The stability of that leadership is essential. It sends a message throughout the system, and really any long-term strategies are undermined by that sort of high turnover. The third recommendation we made was about exploring a model that really brings a consensus exercise to the state at a high level that looks not only at the Department of Corrections, but really at all of our systems, local jails, our sentencing structures, everything. More than 24 states have done this across the country and have had remarkable success in really just making a deliberate effort to review and find recommendations that work within the state itself.
So the 24 states you're referring to, they have implemented reforms and they have gone through this process of studying what's happening in their states. What's the time frame here? Has this been in the last decade that they've done this, or?
This really started about a decade ago. That's absolutely correct. But it's really been heightened and obviously increasing national attention and the scale of it again, and peer pressure, frankly. If all the states around us are taking a hard look at this and are finding ways to reinvest in things that actually work to reduce crime and incarceration, then why aren't we doing that as well?
Right. Go back to the recommendations then.
So the fourth recommendation was really about, this is a very basic operational point, and that is, underfunding and understaffing and not raising the standards of professionalism within the Department of Corrections might be doing us a disservice. There's places we can look in terms of training, in terms of education, and certainly in terms of pay parity. We've been hearing a lot of anecdote about folks leaving the Department of Corrections and going to their local jails because the pay is just better. If that's happening, should we be looking for other ways to increase that and really incentivize good performance? And then the last one is fundamentally important, and it is what we're seeing as successful in other states as well, is that really using data and understanding what the changes that we're making, policy changes and practices, and monitoring and measuring for performance, for outcomes, not just widgets, not just how many folks go in and how many folks go out, but real performance, and not just recidivism, which is a measurement of what crime occurs when. There's layers of performance measurements that can be added that would be of great benefit to both the agency steering itself and more broadly to the public at large in understanding the implications of the policies and practices we undertake.
Well, I think you made an interesting statement that this is directed at the criminal justice system, not just the DOC, and that there are a lot of moving parts involved in what you're studying. What I think I'm hearing, though, is that the PAJ is recommending a fairly insightful, thoughtful approach to restructuring some aspects of the DOC. Is that the case?
Absolutely. So what we have now and projections are continuing to show is that unless we do something differently, unless we actually take a deliberate look, a concerted effort to rethink some of the things that we're doing, the investment strategy is fairly simple. Majority of money is going into institutions. That's expensive. You're not going to be able to give pay raises when you have to repair buildings.
I wondered if you thought that Florida had been slow to address the issues, let alone the reforms, but just slow to address the issues along the way.
I think one of our strategies is that we haven't had a state strategy, and I think that has been a disservice to the public. Amongst our organizations that do this stuff, we all have a pet project, or we come marching up to the Capitol and say, this is what we should fix. It really requires a holistic approach and a longer term strategy. This didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight.
Like you said, a holistic approach to things. It seems that one of the recommendations I was reading from the report focuses a lot on community-based programs as being essential for success and what you're proposing. What kind of programs are you talking about then? Do we have them?
We do. We have them. We have actually some pockets of excellence. There's some places that are doing marvelous things with very limited resources. Again, throwing money at a problem is never the solution, but not having enough money in some areas is certainly a challenge. And more importantly, I think structuring systems so that they're designed to work together. We can't operate in silos. The Department of Corrections does not operate in isolation. It is directly tied to our communities, as I've described, but it's also directly tied to the Department of Health and the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Children and Families, and those agencies need to be more strategic. And actually there's some efforts right now. There's a pilot project that by executive order, Governor Scott has asked to do that addresses mental health. Mental health is a huge challenge. Our jails have become our largest mental health institutions, and that's a disservice.
With the homeless population, we're finding
Absolutely.
the same. The mental health issues are huge. So that's, again, a pervasive. Are you looking at nonprofits to be part of these programs, community-based? Is that a plan?
I mean, I think they're part of the fabric of this. I mean, we have to have some state guidance and buy-in, certainly in strategy. But I think the ultimate answer to this is ensuring that whatever we do is evidence and research informed, and that we're actually, if we're, for instance, contracting for services, that there's an expectation of performance at the end of it. You can't just throw money again.
Right, the accountability aspect of it. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll continue our discussion with Deborah Brodsky. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're talking with Deborah Brodsky, director of the Florida State University Project on Accountable Justice. Deborah, has privatization been considered as an option or some elements of it for Florida's prison system?
Privatization is a part of
so it's
Florida's
already
prison.
there are
Absolutely.
elements already present there.
Absolutely, there's lots of elements of privatization within our prison system and within our criminal justice system broadly. For instance, our healthcare services in the institutions in the Department of Corrections are entirely privatized, and there are some prisons that are actually privatized. The question I think that we all have to ask is what are we getting as a result of that? And like any other government contract, are we getting the bang for our buck? So not just about efficiency in terms of saving money, because there is an expectation that we are actually saving money with these contracts, but also in better outcomes. I mean, if government can do it better, government should do it better. If they can't do it better, then we should explore other options.
Going back to the PAJ as an organization, how do you interact with other state entities like the state legislature? Do you interact directly with the DOC, the Department of Corrections?
So in terms of the state legislature, we're here as technical assistance, expertise, subject matter input at their request. Certainly we publish things independently. We just put things out there into the world. That's what we did with our report in November, and hope that they are listening.
And hope they're listening
Sometimes
and reading.
They do. And in fact did quite a bit for that report.
Yes.
And in terms of the Department of Corrections, clearly we had a role to play in terms of ensuring that the attention was made on the issues at hand. But what we'd like to do now is really focus on solutions next and being a constructive partner. We've got great leadership in place right now, new opportunities emerging. There's definitely a sea change in how things are being handled, but we're also here on the outside to keep an eye on things. Just had a meeting with Secretary Jones last week, and it's great to be able to engage in these conversations, and I think we need to have more of them.
Well, as you said, a holistic approach is going to take guidance and input from a whole slew of areas. That's why I wondered what your association was. Do legislators or administrators of different areas come to you and ask you about a certain area that if you've done research on that's the beauty of what you're doing, to be a nonpartisan think tank? Or is it more generated from what you see, and as you get deeper into the research that you see things emerge that you then expand upon?
It's both. I mean, I think, there's lots of areas that aren't even being addressed yet that we'd love to look at, and so we kind of try and get it, see in the...
Can only do so many
exactly,
things, yeah.
but we're there as a resource.
Yeah.
And responsive, hopefully.
Now, the last legislative session, both the state and the House put forth bills for prison reform. Nothing was passed, but do you expect more legislation to come out? I know that the governor had some executive orders that dealt with as much as possible, but legislation is different. Do you expect more from this session coming up?
So I haven't seen anything emerge yet.
Well, and redistricting is probably
there's a lot of things that are getting it took a lot of energy and a lot of discussion. I think the attention on it was important last year, and unfortunately the legislation became a casualty of the end of session, like so many other things. Right. I think in budgeting you're going to see some different things. I think you're going to clearly the legislature is listening to what the agency needs itself, but the legislature is only interested in that specifically as it relates to that budget process. But more importantly, I think you're going to see people start talking about, well, maybe the system's just too large, and how do we address that? And that again turns to that holistic approach, that we're not going to do this by isolated policy changes.
There's not an easy fix from one way or the other, right? You mentioned before a little bit about sentencing and reform. What are you thinking of in that area? How could that impact cost or recidivism? What could sentencing? How could that play a part in this?
So, I mean, basically, we really need to look at it. I think is the fundamental question is when have we last done a thorough review of sentencing policies and practices?
How old is what we have in place? Is it still pertinent?
And to what populations would longer sentences or shorter sentences naturally lend itself to better recidivism numbers? I mean, nationally, we're really finding that the research here is booming, and you've had some really important studies over the last couple of years that have shown that our relationship between crime is a very complex issue. The relationship between crime and incarceration even more complex. So I think in deciding what is the right path is a difficult one, but we also are finding that incarceration has much less effect on actual crime rates than we had expected before. So those are good things, and it's possible to reduce incarceration and crime at the same time.
Deborah, you mentioned before sentencing might be another area of reform to take a look at. What did you mean by that?
I think that, as a state, we haven't undertaken that exercise in a long time. It's been many years since we've actually done a thorough review. Every year, legislators come to, with their particular, maybe there was a horrible accident, some crime that occurred in their community that really stood out, and they want to change that. And I think they should. Obviously, that's why we elect them. But I think more importantly, are we looking at the system at large? And if something's working, we should do more of it, and if something isn't working, we should do less of it. And certainly what we've learned about incarceration and its relationship to crime decrease, and we're at a 43-year low in crime across the state. So and across the country, we're at the lowest crime rate we've had in many, many years. And we've learned that mass incarceration isn't necessarily the only part of that equation. There's many factors that influence the crime rates, and so understanding where that point is, where we actually lose diminishing effects of incarceration and crime is important, and understanding that we can look at those things through a very objective lens rather than through a knee-jerk reaction is really what we need to be doing in terms of next strategies.
Well, I think, as you said too, it has been a while since some of the rules and the sentences were looked at. Perhaps as times change, what becomes more acceptable, and in some cases what has become legal, changes perceptions on things, and maybe it's a time to readjust and look at some of those rules. For juvenile concerns, is that an area that you would set as a priority to start looking at sentencing reform?
Well, Florida tries more children as adults than any other state in the country.
I didn't know that.
It does. Over the last 5 years, 10,000 Florida under 18-year-old youths were tried as adults in our court system, and that's a process that we're not only do I think we need to look at, we are looking at, and there's current legislation that several different packages actually to adjust the process by which one prosecutor has the real sole discretion to make those sort of really important decisions. There's always isolated incidents, but that shouldn't be the rule.
Well, you mentioned the prosecutor is having a big part in this. What about the role of the judge? How is sentencing and reform rolled back into what can be done through the judge?
I mean, many times what we envision as what a judge is actually able to do is not actually what a judge is able to do. In that case, a judge isn't even able to send a child back into the juvenile justice system with any sort of review process, and we think that's a fundamentally flawed part of the process. But really, it's about prescriptive, sentencing, where we'd like to see a little more discretion in here. I mean, each human being is a different story, has a different background, and for children in particular, an immense capacity for change.
You mentioned before some 24 states making some sweeping changes. Georgia and Texas in particular, when I was doing my reading, kept popping up. Have you studied those? I'm sure you have. Are there pieces that can be, adapted to Florida? Is that part of the recommendations? Is this ongoing? They've been successful, it sounds like.
They are successful, and I would say this, I would qualify it this way. They are successful because they've come together and decided to do something differently. They saw a fork in the road, and instead of continuing along the same lines and continuing to build prisons, which are incredibly expensive and not always effective for all offenders, and really made a concerted, deliberate, consensus-driven effort to change the system and review it continually. That's the really essential part. Georgia's a phenomenal example because they have built into everything they're doing an evaluation process that gets them all together and reviews. And hey, if they didn't do something well, they can fix it. But you don't really know unless you're measuring something whether or not it's working.
So what you're saying then is it's not so much specifics in cases that they've done, but they've come together, they've looked at it holistically. And you have been recommending a continual ongoing review process or some sort of board. And that's what you're saying has been very successful with Texas and Georgia?
Absolutely. I mean, each state is unique. And while we share a lot of the same problems and concerns, there's differences.
In the South, I mean, there's a lot of physical concerns
absolutely.
here.
Absolutely. But the differences, the fundamental difference between Florida and the other states that have chosen to take this on is that we just haven't done it yet. And we're at that moment, and I think it's an incredible opportunity to roll up our sleeves and actually do what is a consensus and deliberate process with a longer term strategy. We can't just look through this legislative session. This is bigger than this legislative session. It's certainly bigger than, this is why we refer to the agency. This is bigger than one person or one agency. It is, it's bigger than one person. It's all of us in our communities, and we have to take a hard look at what's been going on. 100,000 people behind bars is a lot.
It's a lot. Now, you referenced the new leadership under Secretary Jones with the DOC. Are you still, does PAG still recommend more of a legislatively based effort for reform, or do you think it's possible for an agency like the DOC to make voluntary changes, adapt some of these recommendations, and bring about improvement and change?
Absolutely, the agency can do a lot of things, but the real decision-making is going to have to lie in the hands of the legislature itself. They're the ones who write the laws. The Department of Corrections can't tell you who's going into the system, for instance. They don't touch sentencing. They have no control over those things. So they do the best, or we hope that they do the best with what they're given. And fundamentally, they can start to do things, and they can certainly shift the way things operate inside the prisons, and monitor better, and certainly encourage professionalism, as we said. But overall, the criminal justice system at large is a lot of players making a lot of important decisions, and that's the last place that people land in.
Right, and I think that that's the distinction, to remember that it's a criminal justice process and problem, and not just one particular agency. Thank you so much for shedding light on this.
Thank you so much.
That's all the time we have for our show today. Please join us next week when we'll hear from Julie Jones, Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. Until then, I'm Diane Trees.